What's up, everybody? Welcome to Planet Coaster, first in the series here of learning the basics. So we're going to start out with Planet Coaster main menu here, getting familiar with this. First time firing up Planet Coaster, you're probably wondering what all this stuff means. First of all, the globe here really doesn't have any impact on your game as far as where your location is. You just get to place down where you want to put your avatar or your person at on the map here and where you want to start at. It's all it really is a visual representation of that, and also where your friends are at in your friends list over here off of the Steam Workshop. So any of your friends that are on there, as well as featured content creators, are on there. You can also hide them if you don't want to see them. If you just want to see your friends, you can just click on the friends icon here, and the featured content creators go away, and then vice versa. Clicking on featured content only is just the featured content creators. Which is also really cool is if you click on each one of these people's avatar or their name, it's going to pull up their Steam Workshop to show you what is available for them from their feature content creators. I can't say that word. But yeah, so it's all built right in game. If you want to go ahead and install one of those workshop items, you absolutely can do that right from this menu, right from here. And of course that's loading, but that is one option there for you to do. You can also search the workshop, access the Steam Workshop here to get in and actually go through all the different things that are available and download them directly into your park without having to reset the game, which is really nice. So it goes right into your game immediately, and you can start the game and play it with no issues. So the other thing is you got up here is your credits icon. This is going to show you the credits for the video game, and they're also going to play you a little bit of an alternate theme song than the original theme song. It's nice, just a little variation. But we're going to spend a lot of our time here real quick in our options menu, because there are quite a few different settings that you want to work with as you're initially setting up the game. For me personally, I like to have the volume kind of lower overall, and then my balance here, usually I have my park music pretty high in the soundtrack as well, and the sound effects a little bit softer, but that's just my personal preference as far as the audio is concerned. But as you can see, you can break it down to even more detail here, where you can mute the soundtrack for the menu, you can mute the park music, shop radio. There's a whole bunch of different icons and options in here that you can click on to customize your play experience from an audio perspective. Camera-wise, very similar. Actually, I need to reset these because I was playing with this earlier last night and had to adjust some of these settings for recording some video footage. So putting those back to 0, I leave them at 0. To be honest, I really don't notice too much of a difference with the sensitivity, but it could also be because I haven't played around too much, honestly, with the camera behavior. I tend to keep it in simple. There is the alternate, and then there's the advanced option, which again, I will dive into those later once I have a chance to learn them better myself. I just haven't really spent that much time with it. Invert Y-axis, so obviously it inverts the Y-axis for where you're looking. Free look mode, some people prefer to look the way that their mouse is going, others prefer to go the opposite way, so that's just a way to select that option. Focus on scenery allows the camera to focus on objects like scenery, in addition to terrain and paths. Focusing affects camera speed and also zoom limits, so that's good to know. And then of course you've got rotation behavior. It's gonna be center focused or mouse focused. So again, this is just the camera. This isn't the objects rotating. This is just the camera behavior. And then the center focus there as well. And of course, edge scrolling, which a lot of people asked for at the beginning of the alpha period when they played this game, is, oh, we want edge scrolling. Well, it's in there. You can use it if you want. I personally don't like edge scrolling, so I leave it off, but it is there if you want to use it. And then of course, right mouse, what's that going to do for you? We'll show that, but it is available to do a couple different things, like simple drag, drag, and then grab and focus. I typically leave it on simple drag, but we will, again, revisit those a little bit more in detail. Next setting on here is our graphics setting, and to be honest, this is where you're probably going to spend the majority of your time, as well as in the controls panel. But for the graphics, you really got to kind of play around with the settings. It's going to do a pretty decent job detecting them automatically for you. However, you can still go in and tweak and make some adjustments and get a little bit better visual quality. And we'll kind of go through this as well once we get into the game here and show you what each setting does and the impact that it has on the visual experience of the game, which I think in some aspects is kind of minimal. You can probably turn some of these settings down to medium or low, and you really won't notice the the lack of quality as you're playing the game, but you will notice the increase in frames per second. So it really just helps balance the performance of your rig. Obviously, I'm running a GeForce GTX 1070. I'm currently running an older i7 processor, and then as well as 28 gigs of memory. I've got all my settings pretty much maxed out with a few exclusions, and we'll go through each one of these one by one real quick. Effect quality, so that's any of the special effects that are in the game, like your water or your confetti, smoke, your fire effects, mist effects, etc. All of that, kind of the emitters, if you will, particle emitters, they're going to be a different level of quality. Again, helping with render speed, helping with your performance on your machine. Texture quality, again, kind of speaks for itself as how detailed are the textures going to be in the game. This one really doesn't have too much of an impact if you put this down to medium, except if you're getting really close with your camera to a lot of the rides. You'll see some of the finer details and the clarity of the details are missing at lower settings, which if you're looking for that extra level of realism, the texture quality at high is something I definitely recommend. Ambient occlusion, so what this is if you think about if you look at the corner of your room, look at the corner of your wall, what that's going to do is show you kind of how it gets darker in the corners of your room, or in your cube or your box or wherever you're at, and there's light that can't get to it. So anytime there's like a corner or there's a area to where light is not seen, like on curbs, the corners of roofs, walls, etc., this will have an impact, and it will show a little bit more detail, but you will take a performance hit with having it on ultra. So I'm going to actually move that down to high, just actually put it to me ultra, but I'm going to leave it at high. Your multi-sample quality, again, you can play with the setting to see what one works best for you from a performance standpoint. This is just going to give you a clearer picture, get rid of some of those jagged lines on some of the objects and some of the trees. And again, we'll look at those a little bit more in detail once we get into the game to kind of see each one by one and what they do. Global illumination is a lighting process that's done within 3D software or 3D rendering. It gives you a more accurate representation of lighting, a more realistic view. Again, this is a nice feature to have if you're looking for those photorealistic pictures or screenshots or game experience. That's not really something that you're interested in or that you need. You can definitely disable that feature, and it's not going to be a big deal. And you will notice a significant speed increase with that disabled on lower end machines, because it does require less processing power from your GPU. Your dynamic environment event, so what this is going to do is give you different things, like for example, the game has birds that fly around and flocks of them, and it's really actually adds a lot of detail to the game, and it gives it a little bit more of a lives here, this exists type of a world experience with having that kind of stuff on. And the dynamic environment event, or dynamic environment map, if I can talk. Alright, so anyways, screen space reflection. To be honest, I really don't know what this does. There's really no description on it. If you do a mouse over, some of these have descriptions, some don't. When I was playing this back in the alpha and beta period, screen space reflection on just killed my frames per second. And I didn't really notice too much except for water, texture quality and water and the reflections in the water. So I assume that this has something to do, obviously, with reflections, because it states reflection. And again, we'll kind of look and see what that does and try some examples out in game to see what exactly it means and if you really need it or don't need it and what kind of performance increase you can get. Lens flare wise, again, lens flare, you're looking at highlights, looking at the sun, you're looking at the moon, you're looking at lights on your objects that you can put down around the park to illuminate your coasters, your ride, your scenery. If the camera's looking directly into that light, it will generate a lens flare. You've seen this thing on Star Trek, J.J. Abrams on his the reboot. They often make a lot of jokes about him and his lens flare usage because it's a little obscene and a little ridiculous, but that's kind of what that is. And if you're not familiar, lens flare is when the light hits the lens of a camera and you get this kind of like bloom, like explosion of light or halo of light around when the light enters the iris of the camera. So that, or the lens of the camera. So that is what that is. Bloom is going to give you kind of glow, highlighted textures. really bright textures, kind of almost like a glow, but it's not really glow. Your metal textures will look like they're metal because they're going to reflect differently. They reflect light differently with bloom enabled. Depth of field, I leave this off, and I'll show you why when we get into the game. But for those of you that like tilt shift photography or tilt shift play styles, City Skylines actually has this in that game as well. So you can turn depth of field on, and what it does is it blurs everything that's not directly in front of your camera's view, and the background stays blurred, which can be a really neat effect when needed. But as you're playing the game and you're looking around and you see a blurry background, it's not really the prettiest thing necessarily, and it probably could use a little bit more finesse. But overall, depth of field I leave off. Again, personal play style, don't really care about it. Background atmospherics, I believe this is clouds. This is going to be, there's no weather in the game, but as of right now, I think it just has to do with clouds and the trees that are back there. And then same with the foreground atmospherics. In some of the levels, or when you get down underneath the terrain, you actually get this really cool ground mist or this haze or this fog in the distance, and it looks really awesome. And that would be your foreground atmospherics. It's right in front of the camera. Geometric detail, I always have this at very high because again, I want my geometry to look really, really crisp, really, really clean, and that would be your different objects like any cubes or any lines or any coasters for that matter. Anything that uses geometry, it's going to be a more detailed representation of that on the screen. Your computer's going to render it at a higher detail when it's set to very high. Of course, shadows speak for themselves. We all got a shadow. This is the shadows within the game. The higher the setting for shadows, the more visual clarity and the better frame rate you're going to get at the lower quality. So keep that in mind. You're going to get better quality images at very high, but you're going to get better performance the lower you go. So you've got to kind of find a balance, and if your machine can handle it, then obviously leave it at very high because that's going to give you the best visual representation of the game. If shadows aren't really that important, they're not a deal breaker for you, experiment with them, see which one works best for you. Water quality, I had this at Ultra. I really like the water. It's not dynamic water in the game, but texture-wise, it looks really nice, looks really pretty, and just has a lot of depth to it. Boom, bad joke. Okay, one last thing before we dive into the last two items here. We're not going to go through each one of these individually like we did graphics because that's going to be more for a later, more in-depth tutorial. Right now, I just wanted to talk briefly about kind of the getting started, the main menu, some settings to look at right before you jump into the game to have a better experience right off the bat. The main one here, though, is the key is screen mode. So usually when you start a new game up within Steam or within any program for that matter, it automatically goes to full screen. And even if it's not at full screen and it goes into this what's called borderless, it's going to look, I'll show you because it's going to pull it up here in a second, it's going to look exactly like a full screen render. But in actuality, it is not full screen, and your video card is going to struggle with rendering all of these different settings down here when you've got it set up as borderless or windowed. So I'd highly recommend making sure that it's set to full screen and to ensure that the resolution matches what your monitor can handle as well as your refresh rate. I'm using an older 28-inch monitor. I'm getting ready to buy a brand new 21:9 widescreen monitor. I'm really excited for, so I can't wait to get that and play the game on there. But right now, this is really all I've got as an option is the 1920x1200 and 59.9 hertz as my refresh rate, and my display adapter is that one there. Gamma is going to adjust your brightness levels within the game, so if you need lighter or darker correction within your game, you can adjust that here, and you will get a different look. So if we do apply, I'm going to go ahead and bring that back up, and I'm going to confirm that. And we're going to notice that the screen's a little bit dimmer than what it was. So that is good to go there. And again, we're going to touch on this briefly going into interface. Interface color, really cool that you can change the color of your interface. If you don't want the default Planet Coaster blue, go buck wild and pick any one of these colors that you want to change it up. I decided I'm going to try out orange. I have been playing with the default for a while now, but I think I want to actually try it with a different setting just to change it up. You can disable hints. If you don't want to have hints within the game, it will disable them. When you're just starting out, I would recommend not having this disabled. I would recommend enabling it. so that you know kind of what you're doing within the game, and when you encounter a new thing, you'll have a hint come up on the screen that will teach you and show you what to do to some degree. It can be a little bit better. They've acknowledged that their hint system and their control and help system can be a little bit better in this game, and I think we'll see that improved when we get to the next update in April, the Easter update. Show park boundary sounds exactly like it is. It's going to show you the park boundary. Interface auto scale is going to allow, based on your monitor size and based on your resolution, to scale the interface to a certain size to fit your monitor correctly. However, for those that are visually impaired or those that want a larger text, larger screen, larger icons, you can select a larger scale and it will increase your text size, it will increase your windows, but of course that's taking up real estate on your screen for the actual game in terms of seeing the maps and seeing the rides and whatnot, and you're going to have this huge interface, down here at the bottom of your screen is going to take up half of your screen. So I don't really recommend messing with that. 100% is usually good, but if you need it because of visual impairments, you can definitely uncheck the auto scale and increase this puppy up to whatever you need, and it will show you a preview right down here. This will hide the player name, so if you want to have your player name hidden, which is up here in the left-hand corner, you can choose to hide it. I don't really care. My player name's 3PM. Everyone knows my player name's 3PM. So if you want to find me on Steam, that's the name to find me. You can also lock to cursor when it's windowed, lock to cursor when it's full screen. Locking the cursor just means that you can't go to a double monitor and go off of the screen here and kind of end up in La La Land off the sides of your screen. So makes it much easier to control. And of course, your last two options here are your distance unit, either do feet, meters, or yards. And then your speed unit is you can do miles per hour, meters per second, kilometers per second, or feet per second, which is pretty awesome that you have that kind of customization based on where you are at and the system that you use to measure those different units. Last one we're going to look at really quick is controls, because there's two things in here that I want to show you that are going to impact your game experience right off the bat. Number one is ride reputation. So this is a new feature that's in the game, and it's not really working correctly, and we'll cover that in more detail in a later tutorial, but you may want to consider disabling this, or at least know where the option is to disable it, which is in your controls option. And then of course your global vertical snapping. This will help you as you're starting out make sure that your heights are aligned easier, and to make sure that it's easier to align your paths and coaster stations. So again, just starting out, I would recommend checking that. I usually have this unchecked, but starting out, I would recommend checking it to ensure that it's a little bit easier to build right off the bat. And then once you've kind of gotten the controls down and you know how to use the game a little bit better, you can then go in and enable or disable global vertical snapping and kind of go a little bit more free form, a little bit more freestyle. And then of course all your key bindings are down here in each one of these categories. We're not going to cover them all because we're going to cover them actually in the game. So overall, that is the menu, that is the options, that is your start screen, and then of course you've got your options over here to either play the game or to resume your last game. This does resume the last autosave, so if you've got a game that you saved 2 hours before the most recent autosave, and you want to load that one, make sure that you don't click resume, because it will go directly to your autosave, and it does tell you what it is pulling up down there in the left hand corner. Usually you're going to want to do play, and you can start in the career mode, sandbox, which is everything's unlocked. There's no challenge to it. It's just